You're listening to the Business Marketing Show. In this episode, we talk with Taylor Pearson, who is the author of the new book, The End of Jobs: Money, Meaning, and Freedom Without the 9 to 5. We cover a whole range of topics in this episode. It's definitely one worth listening to. We cover topics like the turkey problem, Extremistan and mediocristan, and apprenticeships in today's world. You can get full show notes and links for this episode at businessmarketingshow.com. And you can get a copy of Taylor's book by going to amazon.com and searching The End of Jobs. Today on the call, I've got Taylor Pearson, who is the author of The End of Jobs: Money, Meaning, and Freedom Without the 9 to 5. Welcome to the show, Taylor.
Thanks for having me on.
Funny kind of backstory for me, this book. We kind of know each other through friends of friends, I guess. And your book's been on my reading list for a while, but I didn't give it much priority because it says The End of Jobs and I don't have a job. So I thought, well, this isn't really for me. Yeah, I don't have a job, so I don't know. It's on the list there somewhere. But one of my friends put a post up on Facebook, and he said he read it, and it's now one of his top 5 books. So I'm like, shit, I better have a look at it. So picked it up and read it in pretty much 2 sittings. And I think the title is a bit deceiving because, from my perspective, it kind of puts into words what I've been trying to explain to a lot of our small business clients for the last 3 or 4 years, that the world has changed permanently, and things are not like they were, and they're not going to go back. And as a result, their behavior has to change. So I guess let's talk a bit about that. I think you have a line in the book that says the world has changed, or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, I think there's kind of this inversion. If you look at like all the rules that were true of business in 1950, like everything that is the opposite of that is true now.
So
there's kind of a 180 in that sense.
So when you say rules, let's get into specifics. What are you talking?
So if we want to talk marketing, it's like the obvious example is like if you look at kind of this like Mad Men advertising, that there were very few distribution channels. There was like 3 TV channels. And what you did if you wanted to launch a product was you bought advertising time on one of those TV channels, and that pretty much no matter what the product was, if you could afford to buy advertising on those channels, like your business was successful. And now that's not true at all. That like the ROI from buying those channels is lower and lower. That attention is dispersed, right? There's just like 500 TV channels, and there's Netflix, and there's YouTube, and there's so many different options and so little attention going around. You have to actually get people's attention. People have to choose to pick you. It's not like something you can buy your way in front of them as easily as you used to.
Yeah.
So I guess this is the first thing that jumped to mind. I'm trying to think of more marketing specific examples.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess the big one is the yellow pages. It's the same thing, right? Like a small business, 15 years ago, I guess now, you spend your 20 grand or 40 grand or 100 grand even on, yellow pages ad. You see your yellow pages guy once a year, and then the phone rings, and it's really hard. From my perspective, our primary client is like someone who would have advertised in the yellow pages back then. And it's still, I know we still struggle with the mindset today that, marketing has changed. Like you said, like it's no longer, you can't just, pay the money and forget about it. It's something that you have to be different, and you have to give customers a reason to choose you. Like, why do they choose you over someone else? And you've got something that we are in the age of entrepreneurship, or the entrepreneurial economy. That's what it was?
Yeah, so I took one of the books that inspired me was a book called The Fourth Economy by a guy named Brian Davison. And it was one of those kind of like your situation with my book is I'd heard of it. And eventually someone came to me and they're like, this is one of the best books I've ever read. You have to read it. So okay. So I sat down, same thing. I think I read it. It's like 600 pages. I read it in like 3 days. And he traces this huge history of, how economies have evolved, that we've gone from agricultural to industrial to knowledge, and basically posits, says like what's happening now is like everyone thinks we're in this global recession. And actually is we need to transition from the knowledge economy to the entrepreneurial economy, and we're doing a really crummy job of it. So that's the problem. Like that's what's going on kind of in a macroeconomic context, but also like in individual businesses, in individual people's lives, that we're not making this transition from kind of the service knowledge economy of the 20th century to the entrepreneurial economy of the 21st.
And you said, because I don't know if it's something that you did or whether it came from that book, but you kind of define entrepreneurship or like entrepreneurial skills as two separate things. I kind of felt like you kind of framed it as both a skill that's something you're good at and also an asset that you build over time. Like having entrepreneurial skills is an asset that you can grow and you can leverage as well, which I've never seen I never read it like that before, which is interesting too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't know, would you identify as a natural entrepreneur? Like were you kind of like out of the womb, like selling baseball cards or candy at 8 years old?
Yeah, like I don't like the word entrepreneur, but I guess because everyone calls themselves an entrepreneur now. You meet somebody who's like sold something once and they call themselves an entrepreneur. But yeah, as a kid, we're doing things like we ran a bulletin board and got sponsorship when we were teenagers and that sort of thing. So I guess for me, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I was always really, really good at problem solving. And it was funny, like back in the early 90s, my dad brought home this program for the computer, and it was like a personality test to tell you what job you'd be good at. And I did it, and I did it over and over and over again. And every time it came up with the number one job was to be a salesman. And I hated it because I was really good at computers and wanted it to say computer programmer. But so I'd never identified as an entrepreneur. I always thought that I was, because I like doing computer stuff. I always thought of myself as a problem solver. And I could just naturally, I'd always saw sales as just solving a problem for a customer. But yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I'm very happy that that it came up and said that I'm strong at sales now that I've run businesses since I was pretty much 18, I think. So, yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't say I was so. You sound like, I think you were probably more naturally entrepreneurial than you were. I think I was always very industrious. Like I like to work.
Yeah.
I like to work in school. I had odd jobs. I like to be doing something productive. But I wouldn't say I was super entrepreneurial about it. And I think like we kind of came of age at this entrepreneurial moment, and I was like looking around. I was like, well, what if you have to get good at one skill set, what do you get good at?
Yeah.
And it like became, kind of the book is partially the story of like me figuring out like the answer to that question is entrepreneurship, and that you can actually acquire it. That I don't think I was very entrepreneurial, and that, there's a process you can go through to become more entrepreneurial. And that if you're going to kind of pick a skill set for the next 20 years, like thinking entrepreneurially, being entrepreneurial is definitely, in my mind, the skill set to pick.
Yeah. And when you say entrepreneurial, you don't necessarily mean that you can start a business, because you can be entrepreneurial in a job as well, right?
Totally. I mean, I think you can be entrepreneurial in how you approach your work, and whether you own a firm or, whatever the employment situation is kind of independent of whether or not someone is entrepreneurial, in my mind.
Yeah. And how would you define entrepreneurial skills? Are there like key traits that you'd see, that you'd look at and say, someone is entrepreneurial, someone's not entrepreneurial?
The key distinction I see is someone that is building systems as opposed to operating in systems, which is like, what the traditional school system teaches you is like, here is like, I'm defining the game for you. Like, this is the game. How well can you play the game? Like, you need to like, these are going to be the questions on the test. Like, how well can you memorize the answer to these questions? So in my mind, that's like this that's training you for this mindset of operating in a system, which is, someone's going to give you the rules and you follow the rules to the best of your ability. And, the entrepreneurial approach to that in my mind is like, can you actually can you create the system yourself? So can you redefine the rules of the system? Can you create a new system as opposed to just operating in someone's?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about entrepreneurships, because that's kind of how you got into this whole thing, right? I guess for a lot of people, entrepreneurships has a bad rap, I guess. And that's kind of tied into maybe as well, people go to college or university and that's seen as a better path than getting a traditional apprenticeship. But the way you talk about apprenticeships, it's not just for trade-based businesses like an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter or someone like that, right?
Yeah, I think part of the issue is cultural. Like the word apprentice basically doesn't exist in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
If you went to go as an electrician and like learn how to become an electrician, we would never use the word apprentice.
Okay.
So I think it kind of became popular in the U.S. because it didn't exist anywhere else, so we kind of just pulled it out of history.
Mm-hmm.
But apprenticeship, to me, in the context I talk about it, is this idea of how do you acquire entrepreneurship effectively, right? So if you start from the premise that entrepreneurship is a skill set, and you're saying, okay, well, what's the most effective way to acquire it? In my mind, one of the most effective ways, if not the most effective way, is what I did, which is I was looking around and saying, like, okay, I need to become more entrepreneurial. How do I do that? You go work entrepreneurs. So I was looking around and I found two entrepreneurs that I respected how they ran their businesses and their culture and everything else. And I said, hey, I'll come work for you, and basically, I'll cut you a deal. Like, I know I could go somewhere else and I could make more money in the short term, but like, I'll work for you and I'll help grow your business. But like, you got to kind of peel back the curtain and
Mm-hmm.
like teach me how this stuff works, because I know it's important, I know it's valuable, but I don't really understand how to run and grow businesses and be an entrepreneur. And so I worked with them for 2 years in this kind of apprenticeship position of I want to learn the inside and outs, and like I want to learn how your business works, and I want to meet who
Mm-hmm.
and I want to kind of get access to all these assets you've built up over your career, and in return I'll work really hard and I'll grow your business. And that was, for me, a really good trade. And I think for a lot of other people I've talked to that have been through, similar situations, that instead of going through graduate school or more traditional paths, did really well by going that kind of apprenticeship route.
Mm-hmm. And how did that go from, I guess, because, I guess you're young, but you were younger then. How did that go in terms of family and friends? And because it is kind of dropping out of the track where, you go to university or college and you get a degree and then you get a good job and then you're set for life. How did that, you're working for two guys, and, in Australia we have apprenticeships and they're very structured, and you do it for 4 years and then you have like a trade, you become a plumber or an electrician or whatever. How was your experience from the doing something different to the norm?
I think to some extent, I'm still figuring that out. I was talking with a friend last night, and he was saying he'd met some mutual friends of ours who I haven't seen for 3 or 4 years, and they was like, "Does Taylor make any money? Like, does he like, what does he do?" So like some of them, they're like not quite sure. They're like, "Does he make any money at all?" And I was like, "Yeah."
I don't think that ever goes away. I think my mum still asks me that on a regular basis. Are you making money? So don't worry, that's not going to go away.
I think, part of the reason I got lucky, or at least my family was very supportive, and I know that's not the case with a lot of other entrepreneurs, and I was very fortunate. I think I was fortunate because things for them were just getting worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so like they saw this traditional path. My father and my sister are both doctors, and they're about 30 years apart, 26 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad kind of like, he's 70 now, and he like went through his whole career, and he was a doctor kind of in the US, which is a very good period of time to be a doctor. his income was very good. He had very steady work. Everything was going very well. And over the past 10 years, as that industry has gotten more and more competitive, the cost of medical school is going up. The cost of or the income is going down. So my sister was 30 years behind my dad and was in like a much worse situation. And that was like very apparent to everyone. That it was a much trickier situation. And so they like kind of saw, well, I'm 15 years younger than my sister. Like, okay, like obviously like this path is like getting worse.
Yeah.
So I don't think they really believed in the path I was going down, but they were like, well, whatever we're doing, like this traditional path is not working. So like, yeah, go try something else. And I think part of the benefits of apprenticeships is, unlike if you go get an MBA in the US, at least it's like $150,000 or $100,000. So like if that turns out not to be helpful, like you just paid $100,000 to figure that out. Whereas, if I like went and took this crummy job for 6 months and it ended up not being helpful, like I just like wasted 6 months in a crummy job, which is like, well, like you live and you learn. It's not that big of a deal. You don't have debt or any of those kind of things.
Yeah. Because I guess I was the reverse. I went to university for a couple of years, and it felt like I said, like I just felt like your book put into words what I've been feeling for so long. But for me, after 2 years, I was like, this is not working. Like this, I'm at university learning computer stuff, and it feels so out of date, and I don't feel like I feel like I'm going to do this and still be at the same point in my life. So I quit, and it didn't go down very well. My parents did not like it at all. But I quit and got a job, and it was a bet that paid off in the end. But at the time, I felt like it wasn't the right path. This is like 18 years ago or something. But yeah, I completely agree with you that the traditional path just doesn't work anymore, and something has to change. And it is hard to. I guess you're fortunate that your family will support it, but I think a lot of people don't get that support. And there's still the traditional mindset, if you go to university, go to college or whatever, that you're going to get an awesome job and you're set for life, but it's just really not the case anymore. I mean, even from my perspective as a business owner, I guess a university degree means nothing on a piece of paper when we go to look at hiring people. So it's an interesting one. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 5 to 10 odd years.
It is. And I think it's also interesting, like you don't get any of those status symbols. Or like I think everyone I know that's in like the first 5 or 10 years of their business reinvest very, very heavily in their business. So they're like, running, multi 7-figure businesses, driving like $1,500 cars, and like living in crummy apartments, or, like that kind of thing. And everyone's looking around like, do you make any money? It's like, yeah, it's like all going back into inventory. Like,
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So let's talk about then, that kind of leads us to, I think it's called the turkey fallacy. Is that the term for it?
The turkey problem.
The turkey problem. So explain to the turkey problem, because I think this is a good one, especially for businesses who have been doing nothing about, marketing strategy, changing the way they do business to align with, customers who are now sitting in front of smartphones all day long. So let's talk about that.
So the turkey problem is, if you look, kind of one of the things that's happened, we're talking about everything that was true in 1950 is not true anymore, that one of the big things that has happened is we have less and less moderate amounts of volatility and more events of like large volatility. So like the 20th century was the most peaceful century in history if you exclude the world wars. But the 2 world wars were obviously very, very devastating to everyone that was involved. So you have like relative peace, and you have these like big catastrophic events. So if you look at the life of a turkey, it kind of like serves as an analogy to this, and you can like carry it over into other domains. So like the turkey is born, it goes into the pen, and every day of the turkey's life, the butcher comes out and feeds it. So if you're thinking from the turkey's point of view, day 1, the butcher feeds me, day 2, the butcher feeds me, and this happens day after day after day. And so, the day before Thanksgiving, the day before the butcher comes out to kill the turkey, is actually the day where the turkey is most confident, and the pattern has been true for the longest, that the butcher is friendly and the butcher feeds me, and life is good, and they've been put in this position where all of a sudden they're helpless, right? Like it's the turkey, it's been fattened, it doesn't know how to like peck for its own food, So this like long period of security, you imagine like if you've been getting the marketing analogy, you've been getting your leads from the yellow pages for like 20 years and you say it's never going to go away. The dangerous thing is not that it like starts trickling off. Like if it starts trickling off, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And you can recognize it and you can correct. Like the dangerous thing is like it goes away, in 6 months and you go from, 100 leads a month to 2. And now all of a sudden you're the turkey, which is you haven't invested in any of these like learning other marketing channels or like investing in other ways to bring leads into your business, and you're dependent on this one source, and it just disappears very, very quickly. And that happens, that happens more and more. I use the example of like someone that thinks they're in a very, very safe job, all of a sudden disappearing overnight. It's a much worse situation because, your income doesn't trickle off, it just goes to zero.
Yeah. And you can see that this is happening more and more as well, right? You can see it everywhere. Like, I think the early examples are probably Amazon killing bookstores and iTunes killing CD shops. But now you see even today, like Uber is killing taxis, right? The same sort of thing.
Well, and I guess Amazon's really interesting. I was reading this article a few weeks ago. Amazon eclipsed Walmart as the #1 retailer. And I was thinking about it, and one of the stats it cited was revenue per employee, that Walmart is something like, I think like this is pretty standard, but around like 200,000 top line revenue per employee. And Amazon was something like 600,000. So like triple the revenue per employee. And I was thinking like, okay, where's the other $400,000 going? And I was like, I know where it's going. It's running all these guys I know that are selling stuff on Amazon, doing like these kind of fulfilled by Amazon e-commerce businesses. Like the jobs aren't disappearing. Like that 400,000 in revenue is like still being created. It's just like going to more entrepreneurial people.
Yeah, being moved around, right?
Yeah.
And then the other, I guess there's 2 things that are speeding things up. One is the technology, and then that's opening up this gateway that now everybody's competing with everybody. Like you're not competing with the, if you're an accounting firm, you're not competing with the accounting firm down the road. You're competing with all the accounting firms in your country or city, or even, depending on what it is, worldwide.
Yeah, that you can't differentiate based on geography for the most part. If you can do business over the phone or over the internet, and your competitive advantages, like we're the best in Rochester or wherever you're located, like that's a really tenuous position to be in.
So that kind of, because there's 2 other things. There's Extremistan, is that how you say it, and mediocristan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those right, but they kind of play into that. Those are the words to explain, I guess, that situation as well, right?
We're used to thinking like these like mediocristan is like what I would say like that large volatility. So like maybe you have 100 wars, you have a war each year, and it just kills a few people. War is not the best example, as opposed to 100 years, 99 years of peace, but 1 year of catastrophic bad things happening. And the 100 years of like a little bit of war is overall safer because everyone okay, well this war didn't, like this was bad, we want to avoid this. You can learn from it. Whereas like the one huge event can kill you, or metaphorically kill you, before you get the chance to learn.
Yeah. Cool. So then let's talk about the other thing, that the concept that I felt but I'd never seen it put into words is, and I think it's from the 4th Economy book as well, the idea of limits and limits in a system.
Yeah. So the book is called The Goal by Eli Goldratt. And he was an Israeli guy, and he had a company in the 1980s called Creative Output. And they were one of the companies that was building software for Kaizen manufacturing, which was this idea of, this is like kind of Toyota was famous for this, that instead of like trying to do a bunch of lean manufacturing is the more common term, but instead of trying to do a bunch of units and holding a bunch of inventory at once, just like, can you keep inventory low and just like keep the flow moving very, very steadily, very, very consistently? And they were able to produce vehicles much, much faster, much less inexpensively. And one of the kind of key concepts here is like they were able to think about limits. So if you like imagine a manufacturing line and just say it's like 3 pieces, And the first piece can produce 100 units per hour, and the second piece can produce 100 units per hour, and the third piece can produce 50 units per hour. Everything you invest into those first two pieces is wasted resources. So if you make, the first one can produce 200, the second one can produce 200, and the third one can produce 50, your maximum output per hour is still 50 units, right? Because it's got to flow through this whole stream,
Mm-hmm.
and the limit is that 50. So, you've added 200 units to the production chain, but your output is exactly the same as it was. But if you'd added only 50 units to the production chain and you added to that last machine, you would have doubled your output from 50 units per hour to 100 units per hour.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very powerful kind of way to think about things, I think.
Yeah, it's funny because in a small business context, still today, you talk to most small business owners, all they want to be is hire in Google or get more website visitors. And, coming from that perspective with that, the limits framework, usually they have plenty of traffic and the limit is actually something on the website, the conversion. There's not enough people picking up the phone and calling or sending an email, and their focus is completely in the wrong place. So for me, it gave me that concept of limits was a really good way to explain that, because it's hard to break people's mindset that they think that having the most traffic in the world of being number one in Google is the fix for everything, but that's not really the case at all, which is interesting. And then, I've had this case before where the client's getting lots of leads or whatever, and the phone's ringing a lot, but they're not converting. And this customer complained to me one time. It was a while ago, but he was a guy, he did, I don't really want to give too much information, but he did stuff on roofs. So I called him up and he's standing on a roof and it's wind blowing in his phone. I can't hear what he's saying. And I'm like, this is the problem. That's it's not the website that's the problem. It's,
don't take your sales calls on top of it.
I'm like, Jesus, this is it. He goes, I got 5 calls this week. None of them turned into customers. I'm like, well, that's why, buddy. So it was interesting, this idea of limits, that for me, it was a really excellent framework just to put around something that I think most people conceptually understand, but don't really have a way to put it into words or, frame it in their mind. So I thought that was really awesome.
The example I always used to use was like the slot machine example, which is like, I had a marketing client, I guess a couple of years ago now. It was like a similar thing. They wanted to do SEO, and they had like this giant database of customers who they'd never emailed before.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, like, you don't want to pay me any money to do SEO. You want to pay me money to email your database of customers who like you, know you, and trust you, and like remind them to buy something from you again. And my analogy was always like, if you give me $1, like maybe I can turn into $3 in SEO, but I can turn $1 into $40
Mm-hmm.
for email. So it's like let's make that, like, the one for 40, like let's make that trade for as long as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very common one. We see it all the time as well. That single-minded focus on Google and being number one is just crazy. So let's talk about writing the book, because I guess you wrote it, and you're a new author, I guess, and you haven't written a book before, and you wrote this book in a relatively short period of time. I mean, a lot of people say, I'm going to write a book one day. How did the whole, and they don't, but how did the whole process come about? How did you fall into, I guess, writing this book? Because it's an awesome book with some great concepts. You've kind of taken your experience and built frameworks off that nobody's really talking about, in the marketplace. So let's talk about that.
So it took me from starting writing to publishing about 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was most of my energy over those 9. I was doing consulting as well, but it was like my big project for those 9 months. So I did it, we can dive more into the process. I don't know what particularly would be most interesting, but I just did it in drafts. So I did 90 days, first draft in 90 days, edit the next 90 days, and then publish and do the final draft and publish after the next 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then had alpha readers coming after the first draft and beta readers coming after the second draft and give me feedback. And I did hire a professional editor to do a final edit before it published.
Yeah. What was the tipping point that made you decide, let's make a book? Because you've been writing for a while on your blog, right? Before that, it wasn't like you had done zero writing and then all of a sudden you want to write a book.
Yeah, I had a moment. It's actually the story I tell in the introduction is sitting at a conference about a year ago, October of 2014. And I was talking to one of the entrepreneurs I'd worked for, who's kind of a mentor, and saying basically, like, at the time I was doing marketing consulting and I was starting to build out this agency. And he was like, I explained to him my brilliant plan where I was going to build out a marketing agency and then sell it and then use the money to write a book. And he was like, that's the most roundabout way of getting to writing a book I've ever heard in my life. He's like Amazon exists now. Like, you could just sit down and like write the book in the next 2 months, like, like hack out 10 hours of your week and like write the book. And like, just, like skip this whole 5-year process of like building and selling a marketing agency. I was like, oh, that's a good point. Like, I could do that. So I was like, well, yeah, he kind of took away all my absurd rationalizations at that point. I was like, okay, I'll just sit down and write the book.
And was there a reason why you thought you had to have a big sell the business and make a lot of money? Was that the reason why that you thought you'd have to have cash in the bank, or was it just an excuse not to write it, or what was the reasoning?
I think both. I mean, I definitely there was definitely some level of like just looking for excuses kind of thing. Like, I think that was probably part of it, to be honest. But I think, I'm kind of reconfronting this problem now, which is, I've published the book. I've been fortunate that it's done quite well, but like writing books is not a really long-term economically viable activity unless you're like J.K. Rowling, which I'm not J.K. Rowling. So like I kind of still have the same quandary of like looking for, other ways of like generating a meaningful income. But I think what I didn't totally realize is that a book creates a lot more opportunities for that. I have a lot more opportunities for how I can generate that income, and I can charge more and do a lot of other things that I couldn't do prior to writing the book. That it created a much larger set of opportunities that I didn't even know were possible 12 months ago.
Yeah. And would you have knowing what you know now, would you have written it earlier, or was it kind of the right time? Because you finished the apprenticeship fairly recently ago. It's not, it's not like 10 years ago, but.
No, I started writing the book maybe 3 months after I stopped working with them. So it was like a relatively quick turnaround. So I, in retrospect, I probably should have started it right after. I probably should have started 3 months earlier, but at least for me and where I was at in like kind of my career and business and everything else, it was about the right time, I think.
Yeah. And looking back, is there anything you would have done differently after, the book's been out for, I guess, 2 or 3 months now? Is there something you would have changed, or if you're writing a second book, is there something you'd do differently?
So, yeah, I will. In terms of timing, I will say this. I do think, I think we're like a bit of a magic moment right now in terms of writing books, that if you're in this camp of like, maybe I'll write a book someday, I'm not sure there'll ever be a better moment than now. I think like people still have this conception of what it means to write a book, and like it's kind of like probably get more credit than I deserve. You can put 200 pages of words together and put them on Amazon, and like that's a book. And obviously people may read it and like it's not any good, and they can tell you to get an editor, but the access to writing a book is much lower than most people perceive, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity in that. In terms of what I would do differently, and I've already started thinking about the second book, I think understanding how it fits into the broader marketplace more clearly. I wish I'd thought more about like what the hook is, to differentiate it from other similar books, and like making that hook to go out to major media a little more apparent. I think that was one thing I could have done better. I think I launched the first version that I launched, basically set a launch date for myself, and I launched it with a fair number of typos and formatting issues. And if I'd known how well it was going to do, I might not have done that. But I was like, well, I did a webinar the night before. I was like, I'd love to sell 1,000 copies over the next 6 months, and it sold 5,000 copies in the first month. So I was like, wow, it's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
So I wish it had been cleaner, but in retrospect, I still would have done it the same. Launch it too soon and fix that afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think everything else I would do differently, just based on understanding the publishing industry better.
Yeah.
I think if for me personally, if someone wanted to publish a book with a traditional publisher, I think self-publishing is a better route right now than writing a book proposal. But if you're going to take the trouble to write a book proposal and shop it around to editors, you might as well just write the book and show them that you can write and market a book. And that'll be a lot more persuasive to them than telling them what you could do.
Sure.
So I think that's a really interesting opportunity as well.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, I agree that the window is probably going to close on self-publishing in terms of its accessibility. You're right that we did a book for one of our other businesses, our didgeridoo business, and it was just so easy to do it. There's no technical barrier to entry. There's no gatekeeper anymore like there used to be. So completely agree with you there. I think we're coming up on time. So I don't want to hold you up for too long, but if someone wants to get the book or learn more about you, where should they go?
So the book's on Amazon. You just search The End of Jobs on Amazon. My site is Taylor Pearson, TaylorPearson.me. And if you just go to the homepage, you can download. There's a free chapter if you want to read the first couple chapters and see if you dig it or not. And then more information about me.
Yeah, and you've got a whole bunch of extra resources. I'm still going through the extra resources that it's good that it's not just, hey, it's the end of jobs, you should be an entrepreneur. You have some awesome stuff about what next, and if you are stuck in a job, what you can change or start to do differently about that, right?
Yeah, so there's if you go into the book, you can actually do it if you preview the book on Amazon, you can figure out what the URL is for the bonuses and get them without buying the book. But yeah, there's a bunch of bonuses. Interviews, I did 10 interviews with people kind of talking about, how did they get out of going from university or going from a traditional job? What was their script? What was their path to kind of going down this entrepreneurial route? Giving some different examples to model off of. And then, some tools and templates that people find helpful. Reading list, planning sheets, a bunch of cool stuff. So, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, great to have you on. Thanks for joining us. And I guess good luck with the next book.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Cool. Thanks, man.
You've been listening to The Business Marketing Show. You can find us at businessmarketingshow.com on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher.